All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ariel Rivers, NACD's Pacific Region Representative, and I will facilitate this 1-hour NACD Urban and Community Conservation webinar. In today's webinar, we will learn about engaging partners for urban agriculture projects with Jefferson County Conservation District in Colorado, a fiscal year 2021 grantee through NACD's Urban Agriculture Conservation Grant Initiative. Thank you to Amy DePierre for joining us today from Jefferson County. We will record this webinar and post on NACD's YouTube for future access. Please share widely with your networks and anyone who may be interested in seeing this or previous presentations. Please also keep yourselves muted for the duration of the call. We'll have Amy present her work, and then we'll follow that by a question and answer session. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box and I'll read them out loud for the recording. Now I'd like to introduce Ron Rohall, who will provide a few comments on behalf of NACD. Ron is the chair of NACD's Urban and Community Resource Policy Group, which is part of our Natural Resources Policy Committee. Ron?
Thank you, Ariel, and good afternoon, and I welcome all of you to the monthly Urban and Community Conservation webinars offered by the National Association of Conservation Districts through the support of our sole sponsor, the Scotts Miracle-Gro Company. These sessions are designed by NACD's Urban and Community Resource Policy Group, a subcommittee of district officials and partners charged with guiding the association's services and support for districts' work in developing and developed areas. Our goal through these webinars is to help districts share what they are doing nationwide and enable them to learn from each other and various agencies and organizations. And we appreciate the support of the Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation for making it possible. I invite you to let us know what you think about each webinar and what other topics you would like us to cover by contacting NACD staffer Ariel Rivers. And please tell our NACD leadership what type of assistance you would like from your national association for your urban and community conservation work. And I'll hand it back to Ariel.
All right, great. Thank you, Ron. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to make a few announcements on behalf of NACD. First, I'd like to thank all of our speakers so far this fiscal year, as well as echo Ron's sentiments for thanking our sole sponsor, the Scotts Miracle-Gro Foundation. I'd also like to offer the opportunity to our audience to serve as webinar presenters in upcoming sessions. If you have a unique outreach program, a project you are particularly proud of, or another initiative that you want to get to the word out about, please feel free to contact me and we can identify a future date for your presentation. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today we will learn from Amy DePierre, the Urban Agriculture Outreach Technician of Jefferson County Conservation District in Colorado. She joined the district in 2021, and she's leading the efforts on collaborating with the City of Wheat Ridge for the Regenerate Wheat Ridge Growing Urban Agriculture Partnerships. Apologies. Amy will explain it way better than I can. She is also the co-chair of the Sustainable Wheat Ridge Committee and is very active in urban agriculture. She has an MS in environmental science from the University of Colorado, Denver. Thank you, Amy, for your presentation, and I'll turn it over to you to share your screen and get going.
All right, great. Let's start out with the share here. All right. You should be able to see my screen now. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here, and thank you for the kind invitation and introduction to present to everybody today. As you've heard, my name is Amy DePierre, and I am currently a PhD student and lecturer at the University of Colorado, Denver, working at the intersection of food systems, sustainability, planning, among other things. I was hired for 1 year from June of 2021 through June of 2022 to assist and help manage the Regenerate Wheat Ridge project as the Urban Agriculture Outreach Technician for the Jefferson Conservation District. I'm looking forward to sharing more about this project with you today. All right. Sure everything's working. All right. I'll take about 25 minutes or so to walk through the project and our related processes, and we have time at the end for questions as well. But before we jump into the details of the project itself, I thought taking a moment to highlight regenerative agriculture and its importance within the city of Wheat Ridge would help frame our conversation. Many of you may already be familiar with regenerative agriculture, Simply, it is a system of farming that seeks to promote and healthy ecosystems and restore soils through the use of location-specific and adaptive practices that help mitigate the negative effects from climate change and often work within closed-loop on-farm cycles, such as composting, no-till, cover cropping, and green manure, as well as animal integration and pollinator habitat restoration. Regenerative agriculture, it is not a new idea or method of farming. It's actually very old technology and is similar to and often used synonymously with agroecology, traditional farming, organic growing, and other natural methods of food production. So in the city of Wheat Ridge, agriculture has long been a part of the area's fabric. I do want to note here, as we get into this conversation on land and land access, that the city of Wheat Ridge is currently in the process of developing a city council approved land statement, along with a corresponding action plan that will acknowledge the indigenous peoples on whose land the city of Wheat Ridge occupies. Wheat Ridge was incorporated in 1969. And once a peri-urban city home to a large number of truck farming operations, Wheat Ridge is now considered an inner ring suburb and has no room to expand. However, this agricultural history has remained a part of the city's core identity. Wheat Ridge land use policies and plans strongly encourage gardening and farm business and supports a vibrant community of backyard gardeners with permissive city codes and policies that reflect resident interest in both urban farming and urban husbandry activities. This map here was a quick assessment that I did to look at where agriculture could happen within the city. So simply anywhere that is a shade of green is either residential, agricultural, or parkland on this map. And the light to dark shades, the darkest green is parks, and then agricultural with the next darkest. And then you'll notice all the other land uses are smushed into either commercial, industrial, mixed use, and public hospital areas. The biggest takeaway from this visual is just all the green in this city, at least as of February of 2021. So even with all of those potential areas for productive growing, in 2020, the city of Wheat Ridge recognized that access to suitable land with sufficient infrastructure was a primary barrier for local food producers. In order to address this, the city converted half of the existing 1-acre community garden, known as Happiness Gardens, into production agriculture plots that could accommodate 3 to 4 market growers, and then also changed the garden policy to allow for off-site sales of produce grown at the gardens. So this Happiness Gardens model allowed for a relatively small parcel of land to be leveraged for food production that contributes to the local food system and local economy. So these production plots became the growing model for Regenerate Wheat Ridge Growing Urban Agriculture Partnerships project. There's a question in the chat. The approximate population of Wheat Ridge is around 30,000, Betty Jo. So, yeah. So from this work at Happiness Gardens and also building on previous projects within the district, such as a countywide farmland assessment and inventory that was completed with Go Farm and Jefferson Conservation District, revealed the need for further understanding of land access and availability. So the Regenerate Wheat Ridge was initially envisioned as a year-long project to understand and explore the challenges and opportunities around land access for new farming operations, community engagement, and education for regenerative agriculture. So ultimately, Regenerate Wheat Ridge sought to answer the 2 questions that are posed here on this slide. So first, we wanted to understand how we could promote community-based regenerative agriculture education. And second, if we could increase access to farmable land in the city of Wheat Ridge. So these 2 questions informed the work for this project. To provide here a quick at-a-glance overview for the land access piece, we connected with interested landowners and conducted 2 working groups, wrote a technical assistance guide, and while we were originally hoping for 2 to 3 partnerships, we did have 1 partnership formed through this project. And I will provide more information about each of these as we move through the presentation today. And then on the community and engagement component, Regenerate Wheat Ridge created and led monthly educational workshops and hosted a community harvest festival. All right. So, I think I have to go back one. All right. Skipped ahead there. So as I noted earlier, Happiness Gardens was the model for Regenerate Wheat Ridge. And in addition to providing land that could be leveraged for food production, the community space also became the perfect hub for educational workshops. The city has hosted students from nearby schools as well as the Regenerate Wheat Ridge community. And these hands-on workshops were offered monthly and are being offered monthly on Wednesday mornings. While it's still cool and seems to fit well with most of our attendees' schedules. Workshops are open to everyone, and we have had folks join us from across the metro area. The goals for these workshops are to teach the community about regenerative agriculture, to offer both introductory and more advanced topics, to inspire participants to incorporate regenerative practices in their own growing spaces, and also to provide a connective place for growers at any level to share their earned experiences and to ask any questions of each other to create that community. So this slide here shows the workshops that were offered last season, as well as this season through Regenerate Wheat Ridge. In 2021, there were over 100 participants who joined the educational programming, or roughly about 20 to 25 attendees at each monthly program. So far in 2022, we have had nearly 150 people join the sessions, with 4 out of the 5 months so far reaching capacity at 30 registrations. So on this side, the workshops that are highlighted in green represent core courses or offerings that will or were going to be repeated seasonally due to demand and interest in those particular topics. So that includes soils, the goats, bees, and seed saving. So these core courses cover slightly different material each year as new speakers are invited and participant feedback is integrated into the programming. And while the Regenerate Wheat Ridge program officially ended in June of 2022, the Wheat Ridge Parks and Recreation Department has decided to continue offering these workshops into the future and is currently planning for workshops for the 2023 season, which is really exciting. All right, so what would a presentation be without some good photos? So this slide highlights again the educational workshops, and one of the guiding pieces for the curriculum for Regenerate Wheat Ridge was to offer very hands-on and applied learning opportunities. So on the top row shows a few photos from our 2021 workshops. Top left is the restorative grazing session called Why Goats, where participants had the opportunity to meet and feed the goats while learning how the city of Wheat Ridge partners with a local farmer to enlist the goats to help them mow. The middle top photo shows the Pollinators and Beyond workshop, where attendees could voluntarily suit up and look inside of the active beehives at Happiness Gardens. A side note, one of the folks who is in a bee suit actually happens to be the mayor of Wheat Ridge. So it was really fun to have him come out and support that programming. And in the last photo on the top row, attendees participated in a seed saving activity and hosted a discussion about how to build a sustainable regenerative garden ecosystem. And then the bottom images are from workshops that were held this year. Starting with earlier this year, we started in April and had to move inside due to cold, wet weather, which was probably a good thing in April. And then start with soils. They experimented with the selection of soils to determine texture and free lime content. The middle picture was our native plants and regenerative agriculture workshop that provided attendees with a planting demonstration, as well as an opportunity to help plant the native plant garden. And then last photo on the bottom right there was the Regenerative Farm Showcase, where the market growers at Happiness showcased their vermicomposting soil building techniques, gave a tour of their plots, as well as had an opportunity for attendees to help amend the soil. There were a few great bonuses that we were able to do with the grant funding. In addition to the initial program goals, Regenerate Wheat Ridge was able to fund an expansion of 2 demonstration gardens at Happiness Garden. We purchased 7 fruit trees for an orchard there and numerous plants for the Colorado Native Plant Garden. Wheat Ridge Forestry and Open Space groups partnered with an adjacent elementary school to help plant the fruit trees as part of an Arbor Day celebration. And then through a connection made by one of the steering committee members at the Colorado Pollinator Summit with a woman, Holly Haynes, who is a Wheat Ridge resident and the plant mapping coordinator for the Denver Botanic Gardens. She was able to help source material donations and volunteered her time to map, install, and coordinates the ongoing maintenance of the native plant garden at Happiness Gardens. So both these, the orchard and the native garden, are exemplary demonstration gardens and will provide community educational opportunities for years to come. All right, Harvest Festival. We wrapped up the 2021 season with a Harvest Festival. Great celebration. The theme for the festival was a perfect Wheat Ridge day, and we had about 175 people come out to attend. It was a gorgeous October day, and keeping in the spirit of education and learning, there were a lot of opportunities offered. We had quite a few local experts and growers that took turns for anyone to ask a farmer questions about regenerative agriculture, as well as provided demonstrations on beekeeping, seed saving, and garden tool maintenance. Attendees were also able to connect with numerous community and city organizations who tabled at the event, as you can see. So we have the Wheat Ridge Historical Society, our Parks and Rec Department, the Forestry Department, the Cultural Commission, Sustainable Wheat Ridge, which is an advisory committee for the city, and 2 nonprofit organizations as well, the Family Tree and Local Works. So the Harvest Festival received support from a lot of places. The Cultural Commission provided the musical entertainment and commissioned an original poem, which was really fun to reveal at the event. It was also a zero waste event facilitated by Sustainable Wheat Ridge. And the mayor again and several city council members were in attendance alongside numerous Wheat Ridge businesses who provided like a local coffee shop that provided apple cider. We had a community of artists in Wheat Ridge called Wheat Ridge Creates that hosted family craft activities with pumpkin painting, and a local cantina brought their food truck. We also hosted a seed exchange and a giveaway. And there is one item I feel particularly important to highlight, was that we also ran a community food drive alongside the nonprofit, the Family Tree. And while we were all there to celebrate the bounty of the harvest, most of the food that was requested by the Family Tree for their clientele were items that are shelf stable, which I think is an interesting conversation to highlight some of the challenges around providing fresh food for those who may be experiencing homelessness or sheltering from domestic violence, which is the clientele that the Family Tree serves. So we were able to provide over 50 pounds of shelf-stable food donated through the Harvest Festival, and then also worked with another organization called Fresh Food Connect to allow many gardeners to continue to donate extra produce for charitable use as well. All right, so we'll switch gears now from education and festivals and all of that, and I'll spend time during the second part of the presentation to discuss the growing urban agriculture partnerships. As I mentioned earlier, Regenerate Wheat Ridge hosted 2 working group listening sessions, and these were hosted at the Recreation Center here in Wheat Ridge. These sessions brought together landowners, food producers, and agency partners, and we were able to identify potential participants through GIS discovery, networking, as well as word of mouth. And for this project, we were specifically hoping to talk with local organizations such as churches, nonprofits, and local businesses that had at least an 1/8 to 1/4 acre of land suitable for food production within the city of Wheat Ridge. And we did intentionally keep the groups rather small so that we could allow for greater depth of conversation rather than opening them up to a broader community-wide discussion, which could feasibly be a potential next step of where to take this. For both of these sessions, we did offer breakfast and provided a stipend to everybody who participated, who wanted one, and then also had both Spanish interpretation and childcare event available for all attendees. This is a breakdown of each working group. So during the first working group, we sought to establish a shared vision of a local regenerative food system by having participants draw and then share their idea of what this looks like to them personally. And then from there, we had the producers, landowners, and agency partners placed into small groups where they could discuss the needs, the benefits, and the challenges that surround local food production from each of their respective perspectives. And then the notes and conversations from the first working session then informed how we organized the second working group and helped us to identify 4 specific areas of critical concern, which namely were water, legal, regulatory, and partnerships. We then, for the second working group, hosted roundtable discussions that always had all voices at each table. So they each had a producer, a landowner, and an agency partner. And in addition to those who had joined the first working group, we also invited experts to provide deeper understanding and insight for each topic area to sit at the specific table and provide feedback and help navigate the conversation and questions as they arose. The second working group was focused primarily on actions, next steps, and the necessary resources for the formation of urban agriculture partnerships. So then these conversations and listening sessions provided the foundation and content for the technical assistance guide. So we did write a technical assistant guide, and it was created to capture, and I don't know if it's been shared, or I can share it at the end of the presentation, a link to it. I don't know if you want to throw that in the chat. The guide was created to capture, I believe, this moment in time of what should really be an ongoing conversation around urban farming operations. The guide itself is an outline for anyone seeking guidance for forming an urban agriculture partnership. I think it's there. So please know that any and all feedback or response you might have to the information provided in the technical assistance guide is most welcomed. And while the guide, and like also note, it is primarily Wheat Ridge specific, there are a lot of universal threads, I think, that connect this topic to all other areas and potential districts. And it'd be interesting to hear how that might tie in with everything. So the guide itself is in 2 parts. There's a quick 2-page checklist for the too long didn't read crowd. And then there's also a more in-depth overview on each roundtable topic. So you have the water, the legal, the regulatory, and the partnerships, along with resources and references and organizations that are working throughout Wheat Ridge, Jefferson County, Colorado, and the metro areas. Get that. All right. So before we wrap up and we get into questions, I wanted to take a moment to highlight that partnerships are truly business relationships. And as such, they take time to develop and discuss all the various possibilities for the parties involved. For example, we had a landowner and grower who seemed to make logical sense for a partnership, yet the landowner had a very prescriptive vision and was really seeking a grower who could provide landscaping services for the property rather than providing the land as an asset for the grower's business, which is what the grower was seeking as a business only partnership and a for-profit grower. We did have another potential partner who had a beautiful parcel of land, but did not have access to any water. And while the neighbor adjacent to the land had water rights and was willing to partner, Colorado water law is pretty finicky and funny if you're not familiar with it, but we couldn't find a way to bring the water together with the land. And so this partnership became a missed opportunity, at least for now. However, in terms of successes, we did have a food producer and a church that signed a lease for a 5-year partnership. And this partnership is a supportive community-based one. So they engage closely with the congregation and other on-site organizations to figure out how to integrate into the long-term strategic vision for the partnership on both sides. Regenerate Wheat Ridge was able to provide a micro grant for the partnership, which the producer is planning to use to level the space, to set up irrigation, shade, trellis, and amend the soil this fall in preparation for their first growing season at the property in spring of 2023. And then lastly, we also had a local producer, backyard grower, who was able to launch their business through the support of the Regenerate Wheat Ridge community, from learning about a no cost, no fee, no contract market that is open exclusively for local producers through another local business, Wheat Ridge Poultry and Meats. All right, so in conclusion, to return to those initial driving questions that we shared, Regenerate Wheat Ridge was successful in promoting community-based regenerative agriculture education, so much so that this programming will become a seasonal offering of the Parks and Recreation Department moving forward. And in fact, the level of interest in regenerative agriculture also led the city of Wheat Ridge to look at expanding their community garden offerings. There is a second community garden location that was purchased earlier this year and is currently in the planning phase. A recent community survey showed vast support for an educational garden, and there is potential for a third location in addition to this one that's under consideration and discussion to become an additional community garden. And then the second question, the simple answer is yes, we did form one partnership with the support of Regenerate Wheat Ridge. The other thing is that this project revealed challenges that are inherent in forming these urban agriculture partnerships. It's not as easy as simply pairing a parcel of land with a producer. No two models are the same. And the technical assistance guide does help address some critical areas of consideration when forming these partnerships, but just knowing that they'll all have their own kind of idiosyncrasies to be worked through. Then of additional note, the Regenerate Wheat Ridge project approached urban agriculture partnerships strictly in terms of landowner and farmer tenant lease agreements, rather than exploring ways to provide an eventual path toward land ownership for producers. And this is another next step for future endeavors that would potentially provide further longevity and stability that's necessary for urban farming operations and the support a vibrant local food system economy. All right. And then lastly, thank you so much for your time today. I think maybe I talked a little quickly, so we have more time for questions. And I look forward to, further conversation and any questions you have. I see we have a few potentially in the chat here. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. So we'll go through questions. I'll read the ones that we have, and I have a few for you as well. But I would like to also point out that we have a board member from your district, Karen Berry, who joined, and she also sits on our Urban and Community Conservation Resource Policy Group, which is essentially, of course, our committee that manages the grants, as well as a variety of other urban conservation activities. So Karen, feel free to say hello if you'd like, or add anything as well, either in the chat box or verbally, if you have anything else that you would like to share.
Great.
And on that note, I'd like to, so one of our questions that we got in the chat box was an individual was curious about some of the funding sources that you use for your plantings. But to answer that question, I'd like to kind of go a little bit broader than that and maybe ask Amy if you could share a little bit more about funding sources in general, a little bit more detail about how you used your Urban Ag Grant perhaps, and then also any other funding opportunities that you've been able to leverage beyond that to continue during the project as well as to continue it, if you don't mind sharing those.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So the funding source for the plantings, at least the native plant garden, really was Holly Haynes, who is the plant mapping coordinator for the Denver Botanic Gardens. And she has existing relationships with several, I know there's like a landscaping company that she was able to secure, sand in what she called squeegee. It was kind of pebbly. We needed to amend the soil for the native plantings, and they donated it outright for this project, as well as, I forget I'm trying to remember which nursery that she worked with, but she also had an existing relationship with a nursery that donated most of the plant material. So a lot of the native plant garden was all donation based, so we didn't have to put out a lot for that, and she volunteered her time, and then we continue to volunteer time to upkeep that alongside the Wheat Ridge Garden Coordinator and environmental interpreter who do manage the maintenance of those plantings. Within, as far as funding sources, we really use the NACD grant exclusively as to provide, we did copy and pastries at the events. We, really utilized our connections to the local community. My hiring, my being part of the grant was through that. So coming on as staff with the Jefferson Conservation District to help really build, our email list and our registration. And going forward, I know that we are looking for other funding opportunities, and anything I see, there is a special grants coordinator on staff with the city of Wheat Ridge who is always looking for different opportunities, and he would be the one to connect with. I know he did find, in addition to using the NACD funding for the orchard, he has been able to fund other tree projects through different avenues as well in different parks. But he would be the one as far as for specificity to go to for that, and I'm happy to connect with him as needed on those pieces.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amy. So this is, generally speaking, a really fantastic project, and you shared some lessons learned already about what it looks like working with partners, but I'm curious if you would be willing to share some broader lessons learned in general about maybe the Urban Ag Grant, or generally even starting the workshops and getting the whole project going.
Yeah. So Wheat Ridge, I feel, it was uniquely primed for a grant like this. I think we've been, and I will point again to Karen Berry, has been, instrumental in really moving forward a lot of, the code and policy that is very permissive and allows a lot of the activities to happen within our city. And so we do tend to attract, I think, people that are interested in urban agriculture, people that, want to participate in those types of activities. We have several, I would say, urban farms within the, boundaries of Wheat Ridge for those reasons, because of how that works. So that is a great place of strength to start from. So we've already had a lot of, I think, barriers that are removed because they're codified. These are activities that we can do. And then another lesson I think that we learned through this is that just talking to people. When we were looking for landowners who would potentially provide, land or partner, a fellow city council member and I would knock on doors and just have conversations. And, I think, that makes it more personable, and we had a great response. And it was really fascinating how many people were like, oh, I've been thinking about this. And yes, right over here would be a great place for that. And so it was nice to have those conversations. I think, in the age, granted, it's great to have these Zooms where we can go from anywhere, but when we're working in our local community, it was nice to talk one-on-one and face-to-face about, and walk the property and talk about what it could look like and what it might be, and get into some of those other conversations with folks too. And another reason that we brought everybody into the room together as well for the working groups and listening sessions, because it really, when you sit around a table, I think that would be a lesson that we had, at least for our local community as well.
All right, great, thank you. So we have a question from Betty Jo, who's one of our stalwart urban ag supporters down in Florida. Good to see you again, Betty Jo. She was curious if you have taken these programs into schools to create school gardens, and what your level of NACD funding was, which I think I can answer, Betty Jo, is probably the standard 50,000.
Yeah, it was. And yes, we have taken them into schools. We haven't done the curriculum as much within different schools, but we do have, there's a woman in our Wheat Ridge High School that is working on integrating agricultural arts into the programming and into science, and she's a biology instructor. And so through this program, I was able to connect with her and then connect her with the environmental interpreter, and she's been working on some of those different pieces. So I think she's getting support from that. The great thing about the gardens themselves is that they back up to and are adjacent to an elementary school. And so when we were doing the orchard, the planting, that we were able to bring the elementary school students, we had 2 different shifts to help come and actually plant the trees alongside the parks and forestry open space people and anything that we can do. There is also, I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a Learning Landscapes, which is a different organization, and they are working on, I know currently, how to integrate gardens into those learning landscapes as well. And so that's been, I think, shepherded by the work of a woman through the University of Colorado, Denver, and I'm happy to share more information on that as well. So the environmental interpreter who worked very closely on all the curriculum for Regenerate Wheat Ridge with us is the one who is bringing it into schools and is working with the students. And she is also the beekeeper, the journeyman beekeeper at Happiness as well. So she does a lot of different things in the schools. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you, Amy. We had a question as well from Kafeni in the chat box about technical and financial assistance for urban minority farmers, and especially overseas, which is unfortunately outside of NACD's purview. But as we love to connect on these forums, obviously I would invite anyone that might have some ideas for Kafeni to pop those in the chat box and share those, so that we can help point to other example programs abroad. All right, so now we have a question from Casey. When the grant application was developed, was it already focused on Wheat Ridge, or was that decided once the funding was received? And how did you choose to focus on this area specifically?
Yeah, that was a focus from the very beginning. So it was Wheat Ridge specific. And I think for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, just because Wheat Ridge is uniquely primed for a lot of the urban agriculture activities. And it sits, there's quite a few municipalities within Jefferson County, and we can probably take this work to some of the other municipalities now and see how to better integrate it throughout the county. But it really was specifically targeted from the very beginning for the city of Wheat Ridge. I think just because with the Parks and Recreation staff that was very supportive, the city council that was very supportive, we had the mayor show up to our events and things like that as well. And it was easy, I think, to do a very focused land access. One of the previous projects of the district had focused countywide. And I think when you are knocking on doors and are connecting with the community, when you can bring it to the smaller scale, that made it a little bit easier to have these really very targeted conversations that we were having.
I think that's a great point, Amy. We have over 150 urban ag grants that NACD has administered since 2016. And where we see the greatest success are those that kind of are a little bit more focused from the beginning, especially, and the projects that have sort of a grander vision for a larger county system. Unfortunately, sometimes those ones can get a little slow to get going and maybe take a little bit more time, because it can be so challenging, as you said, to build some of those initial conversations and partnerships to get things going. So that's a great reminder. All right, so I have a couple questions about the curriculum in particular for the workshops. I'm curious, you had like such a diversity of programs that you were offering through that. So I'm curious if you could spend a little bit more time about how you selected those specific topics and if there's any that you would change or do differently. If you could just generally spend a little bit more time discussing that.
Yeah. So there was a group, we had a steering committee group that would meet and talk and was really instrumental in outlining what the curriculum would look like. And in the beginning, much of it, we looked at kind of seasonal and what made sense in the arc of, a growing season. Well, let's start with soils. Maybe, that's where we all need to begin there. And then to seed saving at the very end. So I think that was part of the impetus. And then looking at what strengths we had on the committee and who we knew who could lead those types of programs. And I think, in the future, we'll reach out a little bit more. I think we've got a great wealth of expertise here that we can, pull from and tap into. We were very, very, it was important for us to have hands-on, as I said earlier, very hands-on, very applicable activities that you could really do together. So looking at soils, how do what is the soil pyramid, and then looking at a jar of soil and how do you tell what type of soil you have and what you might need to amend it, to the point where we had one of our local farmers brought different manure amendments to show the different consistencies and what's hot and what's cool and what you want to do, and if this then that, and make sure you overwinter your poultry waste so that it doesn't burn your garden. And so we talked about all of the different kind of intricacies in the beginning, to having the bees. I mean, I think a lot of us, we were familiar with beehives, but opening up a beehive and taking a look at it with an expert and being able to talk through what you're seeing and what you're looking at, to even handling, goats, which to some people are, you don't get that. You see them, behind a fence doing their work, but being able to get in and actually interact with the animals and understand, that they all have their own different personalities, and this one's a little shy and this one don't get too close, or, what that looks like. So it was really just a way to start, tapping into a lot of different conversations. And again, I think we're fortunate by having, a council member, farm owner who lends out her goat herd to mow different areas, and having, a beehive at our community gardens, as well as, volunteers who are willing to source plants and to, lead a workshop and have that expertise. And I know as they're starting to build out next year's curriculum, looking at that same arc and where to stand and how to talk about it. We did have one idea that didn't fly, of doing like an overwintering book club, which I'm still thinking would be a great thing to kind of deepen that knowledge and continue to grow, as well. So I think the curriculum, that's where a lot of it came from, is just hands-on and showcasing. And one of the biggest pieces I think that we realized through the curriculum is that while yes, you have a person standing at the beginning and teaching, there's so much community knowledge as well. I think that cross-pollination within the community of the beginning gardener asking questions and having a seasoned gardener there, is just the community then would start to connect as well. So there was a lot of teaching that happened, not just from the speaker to who was present, but within the attendees themselves. And that's really beautiful when that started to happen.
Thanks, Amy. And that's a great reminder too, to our audience here. Feel free to pop any questions in or comments or lessons learned from your own projects as well into the chat box. We'd love to hear from you and see some of those as well. So I am curious, Amy, since you mentioned bees and goats and things like that, if within this project, you mentioned earlier during your presentation and with support of Karen that there is some policy work and things like that that needed to happen at the city level. So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind, spending just a couple minutes if you had to do much advocacy to get this project going, to be able to have the bees in the community garden, for example, or what it took to get the goats in downtown to do some grazing. If you could spend a couple minutes discussing some of that.
Sure. Well, while Wheat Ridge is, just 30,000 people, and we are, part of the Denver metro area, but we still feel like kind of a small town. So it's, I think, we're really able to be more agile and move more quickly and be responsive to, what people are asking for. And I think we were maybe a little bit behind, so it put us ahead in some ways. Like we didn't, say you can't do this, you can't do that. And then by the time we were putting it into the code, it was happening already around the country. We have a lot of larger properties in Wheat Ridge that are catered for, those truck farming operations and those farms. We have a couple of different conservation easements that are farms. So a lot of that work was done. A good example actually is right now we're working on composting language. We realized, or we had one of the Sustainable Wheat Ridge committee members realize that we didn't have great composting language in, our ordinances. So we, what we did is we looked around at all of the different municipalities around us and what were good examples and what would work for us. And then we went and took what would work for Wheat Ridge and drafted a memo for, the city council and city manager. And so that's really how we tend to advocate. We have a lot of ability to talk directly with those who will make those changes. I see. Yeah. And Karen can speak to a lot of that. I know she was a big piece of the policy. And it looks like she's got her hand up.
Yeah, please go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, so a few years ago, what we did is we took a look at all our different zoning codes and made sure that they were basically urban garden friendly, such that you can have a farm stand at every residential home in Wheat Ridge. And as Amy said, Wheat Ridge has a very long history of agriculture. It supplied all the produce to like folks going for the gold rush up in the mountains in the 1800s. So it had a long history. So we did have that basis, but we did go through and make sure that our development codes and our zoning codes were very friendly to urban ag. And then we created a guide for folks who wanted to raise chickens and to do everything that sort of had a summary of everything you can do and everything you couldn't do. So you could just look in one place, and it had quite a few resources with it. So I would say just making sure we had no barriers in all our codes. I think one of the things that, again, composting was one, but the other thing that we had to work through were basically hoop houses and whether those were going to require a building permit or not. And so that took some discussion with our building department, but again, they were very willing to work with everyone and to come up with some very easy to understand and real workable solutions around having, a hoop house.
That's great, Karen. Thank you. I'm curious, is that guide online? I know several districts nationally have been curious about example codes or ways to adapt city code, things like that. So that was a tool that we could share with people. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think I think it's still online at the city, and it might be online at the district, but I can find that link and send it to you.
That'd be
The-
great. Thank you, Karen.
The link is in the technical assistance guide as well. I
there you go.
I did include it there, and there are some examples of language in the different ordinances and when they went into effect under the regulatory section. So all of that, yeah, is in the technical guide. I know that was such a great piece that you put together. So thank you for reminding about that, Karen. So it lives within the assistance guide as well, the link to the city website with it.
Perfect. Thank you. So Betty Jo, did that answer your question about chickens in the system as well? Good.
Yeah. We haven't done a workshop on keeping chickens though, Betty Jo. So that might be something to think about for future educational sessions for us.
That would be an excellent workshop, because I know in Florida, we're seeing more and more people, homeowners in very urban areas are now keeping chickens, even little tiny 6, 8, 10 chicken mini flocks, but it's picking up steam all the time.
Yeah. There's a New York Times article, I think in the beginning of COVID, that the United States stress bought all the baby chicks. I know there's yeah, I think it's continuing for sure. I don't know what I'd do without my flock.
Same, and my goats too. I have to say my goats were always pleased to see the pictures from your districts in the report.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I'll have one more question for you. If anyone else has any, please feel free to chat, put them in the chat box as well. Otherwise, we'll wrap up on this one. And so I'm curious, you discussed during the listening sessions that you did mention that you wanted to keep those particularly focused and those groups small to be able to capture good information and be able to draft some information out of that. So I'm curious if you could discuss a little bit about how you decided what the appropriate number was for those events and how you targeted those specific audiences and who that audience was, et cetera.
Yeah, our number, we wanted to keep it between 15 to 20 participants in addition to the steering committee to keep, so we had, I think 3 to 4 landowners, 3 to 4 producers, and then agency partners, so that was where we landed. And that was a group decision that we did bring a facilitator in. So we used the funding to have a facilitator that we brought in for those listening sessions and those working groups that kind of helped us identify what questions to ask, how to run the sessions to keep us on target, to set the agenda, navigate all of those pieces. And then we really wanted to have, the dedicated group perspective of each group, and then to widen it in the second working group. We knocked on doors for the landowners, which was one, to find, the particular folks who were interested and would want to participate. And then we do have, we have a great network of producers. We brought in a couple of, we wanted to make sure that we had multiple voices heard. So we had a couple of people from Frontline Farming, and we had, a couple of people from, we had the backyard gardener who opened just their local business. We had an orchardist. So we had a good range of producers, not just vegetable producers, but also an apple grower who runs a cidery participated, plus a backyard grower. So we really tried to, the gentlemen who grow at Happiness Gardens, Sunnyside Farms, we brought them in as well, because obviously we're basing it on the model of Happiness Gardens, so they could provide, their experience with that model directly to the group. And so those are bringing people to the table. Yeah, it was fun. It was a good group, and it was amazing to see how the energy in the room kind of came together around that too. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like the facilitator was probably very helpful as well in deciding the appropriate routes to go, so to speak, on how to engage. Yeah, excellent. So one final question from the audience: has NRCS been able to help with any of the practices, probably either technically and or financially?
through the grant for sure. So
Yeah.
I know some of that. And then practices, I do know the USDA, the Urban Agriculture Toolkit that they had put out previously, which is also linked in the guide. So there are toolkits there, and there's a lot of different services and I believe webinars, and there's other information and practices that are readily available that I think are incredibly helpful. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you,
Yeah.
Amy. And just a reminder for our audience, if you're not aware, NRCS is our sponsor for the Urban Agriculture Conservation Grant Initiative. They've been funding that grant since 2016, and of course, they're an incredible partner in that regard. So thank you to NRCS for that. All right. And on that note, Amy, we're just approaching the hour. Do you have any last minute thoughts or concluding statements for the audience?
Oh, on the spot. Just keep growing. Thank you for being here. I mean, just being present, I think, and having an interest and taking everything back. It was lovely to see the registration list and where everybody is calling in from. So I kind of hold the idea that we're all, working the same. We're the same farmer in a different land. So it's nice to know that there's connectivity. No matter what you're doing, we're not doing this on our own. There's a community within our own local community, I think, as you were saying, within the broader community, and it takes all scales to bring it about in all different types of perspectives. So I just appreciate the ability to come and share this with you. And it was an amazing product to be able to work on. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. That was some great words of wisdom. And I definitely learned a lot today. So I thank you especially for your presentation. And as I mentioned, I'll send the recording around to everybody that registered. It will go on our YouTube probably within the next week. So for our audience, please feel free to share widely the link and the information that Amy shared with us today so we can continue to build this community. And on that note, please feel free to reach out at any point in time to anyone on this call or otherwise. If you have any questions about NACD's work, the Urban Ag Grants, or anything else that we've discussed today. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.